the other failing, I think, in leadership is that we don't teach leaders that they need to let their teams know that it is okay to make mistakes. It is okay to make a mistake. Now, we know that some mistakes are catastrophic. Some mistakes are just easily fixed. But you cannot hold somebody accountable for a catastrophic mistake when it's a typo in a memo. You know what I mean? And there seems to be sort of a one-size-fits-all punitive structure for mistakes that are made. And that's a problem because you have people who are human and they're doing the best that they can do, and they made a mistake.
Honest question, and please do drop a comment on social media, or if you leave a review on Apple Podcasts or wherever with your answer. What is your perception of HR? What role do they play in your work life and your career? My guest today is Mandee Bowsmith, a seasoned veteran of 2 decades in human resources in municipal government, having specialised in labour relations, employee benefits and risk management, and having overseen complex negotiations and innovative new HR strategies. Mandee has some fascinating insights into the world of governmental HR. So we're going to be talking about topics such as why HR doesn't have to be the bad cop all the time, what micro-coaching looks like and how it works, why conflict isn't automatically something to be avoided, the vital role of honest, clear communication and the art of conversation, as well as many more learnings and tips about leadership and the role of HR from Mandee's career so far. And all of that governmental and public sector experience, we can really sum up Mandee's approach and really the tone of today's conversation with the phrase humanity in leadership. So as always, plenty of useful and important lessons in this episode, and I hope you enjoy the conversation too.
Welcome to the Leading with Integrity podcast. Leadership talk for the modern manager. With your host, David Hatch.
Well, Mandee, welcome to Leading with Integrity. It's lovely to have you on the show. Can't wait to get into our conversation about leadership and micro-coaching and all sorts beyond, I'm sure, today.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here and to talk about these things.
Yeah, well, you're most welcome. And we're going to throw you into the deep end a little bit to start us off. Over to you, really, to introduce yourself to the listeners. Tell us a bit about your background, your career so far, what you and your business does today and why you do it.
Right. So my name is Mandee Bowsmith. I am currently the owner of a company called Blue Note Resources. It is a coaching and consulting firm based in Reno, Nevada. My history though, and what led me to open my own firm is I have spent 24 years in government human resources as a human resources professional. And that's in municipal government, so cities within Nevada, and in state government, working for the state of Nevada. And one of the things that led me to open my own business in the space that I'm in is, I don't know about you, David, but a lot of people I talk to hate their human resources departments. And it bums me out. I mean, to be perfectly honest, it bums me out to hear how people perceive their human resources departments and some of the experiences that they share with me they've had. And one of the things that I would like to do is to put the human back in human resources, right? What is the number one asset any employer has? They're humans. And if we treat our humans poorly, that asset is either going to dwindle away or it's going to not perform the way we need it to. And so for me, putting the human back in human resources also sort of informs my leadership philosophy, which is trying to put humanity back in leadership. And over the course of my career, I've met lots of different people. I've worked for lots of different leaders. I've worked with elected officials. I've worked with people who are appointed. I've worked with people who've worked their way up through the ranks. And I think that there's a mythos surrounding leadership. First of all, who can be a leader and what leadership should look like and what leadership shouldn't look like. And my goal sort of is to bust that open. I tried to change the way that human resources was perceived and portrayed from the inside when I worked for government. And I tried to change the way that leadership was approached by those that became leaders in the organization and from the inside. And now I'm doing it from the outside. So that's what I do.
I know what you mean when it comes to HR. It brought to mind some of the social media cliches like advice to employees that HR works for the business, it doesn't work for you, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And there is a quite negative perception. Having said that, in my personal experience, I've only worked for one company that was big enough to have HR, and I got on with them surprisingly well. So, yeah, it can go back and forth. And I do feel it's like any role, isn't it? I mean, leadership as well. It comes down to the people who are doing it.
Mm-hmm. I
don't know what it's like in government, but certainly in the private sector, there's a few high-profile examples, shall we say, of HR being weaponized
certainly
against the employees. Perhaps you've got some stories about that more than I do. But
it really, it makes sense in a way because most leaders, and here's sort of where we get into leadership a little bit, most leaders in my experience are conflict averse when it comes to their employees. They may be bulldogs when it comes to whatever business they're doing or a business transaction or, getting laws passed in the case of state government or something like that. But when it comes to dealing with their teams and dealing with employees and personality conflicts, or maybe you've got an employee who has been a rock star and then suddenly is underperforming, they don't know how to deal with it. And part of it is because we don't give them the tools, right? This is really an us problem, right? We as an organization and as human resources professionals don't give incoming leaders the tools to really handle those kinds of conflicts. And so what ends up happening is you have a leader who may be a rock star in quote leadership, but they're crap at being a supervisor or a manager. And so their thought is, well, I'll just have HR do it. So they pawn it off onto HR, and HR ends up being the bad guy because HR then has to have the conversation with the employee. And if there's discipline that results, they're the ones who typically have to hand out the discipline. And if something else happens, they're the one who typically has to get back involved and talk to the employee about things. And it really is sort of it's sort of an upside down model, the way that it works now, in my opinion, and in my work as, when I had my jobby job, my philosophy about human resources is that we are the only true internal service department an organization has. We are there to help the employees, right? David, if you're hired by the organization I work for, you're hired to do a specific job. Let's say you're an engineer. You're hired to do engineering things. You're not hired to sit there and worry about your group health insurance benefits. You're not hired to worry about your retirement benefits. You're not hired to worry about policies and procedures necessarily and how they apply to you. That's my job. My job is to help you when you come and ask a question. Mandee, I don't understand my medical benefits. Can you help me? My job is to explain it to you the best I can so that you stop worrying about it and you go back and do the job you were hired to do. Right? So as HR professionals, we really have sort of gotten away from what the core responsibility is, and that is to take care of the employees. Yes, there's gonna be conflict. There's gonna be employees who've done bad things. There are gonna be employees who've done stupid things. There are gonna be learning opportunities. But I think that part of the problem is we treat human resources as a hammer rather than a tool to help us get through whatever issue we're having with employees. And on the other side, and I don't want to make it sound like human resources people are amazing, because trust me, I've met some real bad human resources people too. But on the other side, the HR folks really need to remember we are dealing with humans. How would we want to be treated if we had if I was your subordinate and you came to me, David, and you said, Mandee, you're not performing. You're not doing what I need you to do. I need you to go talk to HR. If I go talk to HR, I'm scared to death, number one, that I'm going to lose my job because I've just been told I'm underperforming. My boss you probably haven't shared with me what that looks like, what that means. So I'm scared to death. I don't know what that means. So then I go meet HR and I'm thinking, can somebody please explain to me what's going on? If you don't have a human resources professional that has compassion, that has understanding, and we're talking about reasonably, like we don't want the sob stories. We don't want the too much information stories, right? We want to be able to understand what is going on in that person's life. Because maybe I'm underperforming because I recently lost a family member and I'm dealing with it. And I'm a private person, so I don't tell anybody about it, but it affects my day-to-day job. Maybe I'm not comfortable telling you as my boss that. Maybe I tell the HR professional that, and then the HR professional can go back and say, well, unfortunately, Mandee's dealing with a family loss. We need to extend leave to her, or we need to do these things, or we need to have a little grace, or something like that. But the HR professional needs to have an active listening approach. What is going on, right? You're a rock star employee. You're underperforming right now. Something is clearly going on. What's going on? Because unfortunately, right now, the way that leadership is structured, especially in the United States, and probably internationally, but my experience is here, leaders are not going to sit down with somebody and say, what's going on? A good leader will, but just your run-of-the-mill everyday leader is not going to.
And I think you've touched on there one of my big frustrations in the way most, certainly in the private sector, in businesses, most leaders see HR and the way that they deal with these problems as well. Because to me, even the scenario you've described there, the leader in that situation is abdicating their responsibility. It should be them. And
Yes.
That's why the good leaders do it.
Yes.
And HR is there as a resource. So if you're not sure about, say, some aspect of employment law, say, for example, go to HR, ask for their advice. This is what's happened. How should I handle it? What's the law say? Where are my kind of guidelines, my boundaries in terms of what I can do? And then go and have the conversation yourself with the employee. Don't just go, HR, deal with it. I don't want to. Because ultimately, leaders are paid the big bucks for exactly that type of responsibility.
Exactly.
And HR usually are not paid that much big bucks.
No, sadly, we are not paid a lot. No. Not for, we, this is awful, but we used to joke when I was an HR professional, boy, we should get hazmat pay for dealing with this stuff. Because, because you have some leaders, because of the mythos and the perception surrounding who and what a leader should be, they behave like crazy people. And so it exacerbates whatever situation has happened. And you're like, if you'd have come to me, like when this first started happening, I could have walked you through that. And that's the other thing with leadership. Leadership needs to lean on their resources instead of this. Here, in my opinion, or in my experience, leadership is supposed to look like the suit and the tie, and we're all stoic and we don't have any feelings, and we certainly don't have any compassion for anybody that has anything going on. You just do the thing you're supposed to do with the widget and produce the widget. Well, how realistic is that? right? I mean, let's be honest. How realistic is that when you have a team of humans, and humans by nature have feelings and thoughts, and they want to know why they're producing the widget. They want to know how the widget fits in the greater machine that we're building. And if as a leader you're not being clear and communicative and reasonably compassionate, I say reasonably because we've all had that employee that takes it a little too far and gives us a little too much information about their lives, but reasonably compassionate, being honest, having integrity, having clarity of communication with your teams, being able to say, hey, David, how are you doing today? How's your son? I heard he's playing soccer. How's that going? Or football for y'all. Um, how's that going? It doesn't have to be an in-depth conversation. It doesn't have to be finding out somebody's life story, but taking the time to show an employee that you know their name and that you care, that something's going on in their life, you recognize their humanity outside of their employment, goes so far for a leader. That employee will then do whatever they can do to make sure they're doing the best job possible for you. It really is a simple formula that people just miss. Anyway, sorry, soapbox, I apologize.
Yeah. No, I agree with you. I mean, it's exactly as you're saying. I think we're well aligned in our views on leadership, certainly. But it's what you said at the beginning, isn't it? It's putting the humanity back into it. And I can't find the words to express how heavily I oppose this idea of you leave your emotions at the door when you get to work.
Yeah.
It's like, it's old fashioned, it's out of date, it's counterproductive, it's harmful even, I think.
I think so, yeah.
And it damages your leadership, especially in this day and age with all the stuff that's happened from COVID and since then. And the world we live in now is so very different to, I mean, when that sort of approach might have maybe worked. And even then I'm still skeptical, let's say back in the 70s or whatever.
I don't even think it worked then. I think
no, me neither, but
right. We have this crazy mythos about what this should look like and what a business person should look like. And, 9 times out of 10, it's a businessman, right? The 9 times out of 10, your leader or your executive is a man. And there's this idea that they're a suit and tie and clean cut and straight laced, and that they are not in any way compassionate or showing any kind of emotion. I mean, we're not robots. It's one of those things that just baffles me. It baffled me as an employee, and it baffled me as a human resources executive that I had peers who behaved that way. And I'll just share a story. When I took over as the head of human resources for the last organization I worked at, one of the things that I did first was I asked to meet one-on-one, either in person or via Zoom, because we were spread out a little bit in location, with every employee in my department. People thought they were being fired. They were like, why do you want to talk to me? Why does the person in charge want to talk to me? What did I do wrong? What's going on? And I was like, well, I was hired in the organization during COVID. So I was in an office by myself with nobody else for 2 years. I didn't know who anybody was except on Teams or on Zoom. I had only met 3 or 4 people in person, and suddenly I'm taking over the department. I want to know who's on my team, right? I want to know what they do, how they do it. And I had payroll, I had recruitment, I had training, I had labor relations with unions, I had employee relations. So I had this whole team, and I didn't know any of them. And I didn't know who knew what or how they fit or what. And so I asked them, so I'm meeting these people. These people are scared to death to meet with me because in the past, anytime they met with the leader, it was bad news. And the leader never, not immediate predecessor, but 2 predecessors ago, would go into his office and close the door and say, "Don't disturb me." And this was pre-COVID, right? Like, "Don't bother me. Unless somebody's bleeding or somebody's on fire, don't bother me." What kind of a leader is that? Right?
Well,
So,
it isn't one, is it? Yeah.
right. But so I met with people and I said, I want to tell you a little bit about me and I want to learn about you. And I tried to articulate what my long-term vision was for the department, because in a civil service system, it's difficult to change, to evolve and adapt to how the world is changing, right? Especially in government. And so part of my vision was we need to figure out ways that we can innovate. We need to figure out ways that we can adapt and really reach different audiences, because civil service, this isn't your grandpa's civil service anymore. This isn't you just get a job and you stay there forever and get a retirement. It's not like that anymore. So we have to change. And people were stunned, first of all, that they weren't being fired. And then it was a way for them to connect with me. And they started to ask me questions. They started to, we used Teams as our platform. I started to get Teams questions from people about, hey, where's this going? Where is this going? And so then that informed how I did staff meetings. So then I did staff meetings where I tried to give them as much information as I could about the organization-wide direction. Here's where the whole ship is going, right? And here's how I see we, as the HR folks, fit into this directional movement. And here, this is going to be hard, and this is going to be hard, and we've got to do this. But, I will tell you as much as I know when I know it. It bought so much credit for me to show myself as a human, as just another human trying to do my job. You wouldn't believe it. It was amazing. And I think that there are a lot of leaders who are stuck in that perception of what leadership should look like. They don't communicate with their teams. They're not clear with their teams. They don't try to understand their teams and they don't try to understand the struggles so that they can really advocate for them. I mean, that's another thing, right? You inherit a team and the team has 65 issues that haven't been resolved in 2 years because the previous leaders haven't done anything about it because they haven't wanted to know. They just said, go fix it. Well, obviously they can't fix it. They need help, right? So when you start to dig into things like that, and then you start to try to help folks take care of those things, you earn so much leadership credit that those people will work day and night for you and for whatever the common cause is. And that just one thing, right? Showing you care, getting to know who works for you, learning what they do and how they do it, and learning where the pain points are so that you can try to help, goes so far.
Exactly. Yeah. And that story is such a good illustration, isn't it, of the difference it can make when people feel like they're seen, when they feel like they're being heard and listened to. And that should be like the baseline, the basic minimum amount any leader does.
Right.
Like shutting the door and saying, don't bother me, isn't leadership.
No.
But if you can then go beyond that and understand, like you say, the pain points and then try to actually do something about those, yeah, I mean, you're only going to go higher and higher with that approach to leadership, I think.
Yeah.
So it's interesting, though, about the way leaders get stuck in that old school, let's call it, kind of mindset of what leadership looks like. And you've mentioned conflict already, and I do wonder if there's, I don't know, a link between these two problems.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think people, when they get stuck in that mindset as leaders, and they do want to avoid conflict because nobody likes it anyway, but when you're a leader, it can only end badly for you in when you're stuck in that kind of headspace.
Right.
Because you're going to see that as okay, I'd rather not get into that because you might not like what I have to say, and then you'll leave, and then I'm stuck and I have to hire someone or do the work myself, and so on and so on and so on.
Right.
So let's talk about conflict a bit more, though. So some of the common causes of workplace conflict, what would you say the most likely ones are, and what should leaders be doing to address them?
Yeah. So in my experience, in what I've seen and what I've worked with, the most common causes of conflict are personalities within the teams, uh, perception. Perception is a huge, huge bringer of conflict because people, those personalities draw conclusions from what they see and from what they hear. And that creates a perception, whether good or whether bad, about what's going on. And then they internalize it. Well, Sally's getting something I'm not getting. I perceive that Sally's being treated better than I'm being treated. It's the the perception, a lack of real, honest communication. I think that, we live in a time that is, in my opinion, both amazing and crazy. And it's amazing because we have so much awareness, right, of diversity, of equity struggles, of inclusion. We have so much awareness of workplace law, of, what's illegal, what's legal, what you can do, what you can't do. But it's also bad because people get very, you know, people are very all or nothing. Well, I I can't call I can't say good morning, young lady, because it sounds derogatory anymore. So I'm just not going to say good morning to anybody ever again. Like that was a true situation that happened with me.
Yeah, I believe you. Yeah.
Yeah, it's so people are very all or nothing. I mean, this is going to sound stupid. It's like when you're on a diet and you have a sugar soda, and then you're like, well, I've screwed up today. I might as well eat 3 banana splits because I've screwed up today. It's the same thing. It's this all or nothing idea. We're very 0 to 60 creatures, right? Um, and directional clarity is something that causes conflict. One of the things that I found in my, as an employee, as a subordinate employee, as a team member, when I didn't understand what the clear direction of not only my leader was, but of the organization was, I felt lost. And I felt I had perceptions. Like, does my leader know what they're doing? Does this organization know what it's doing? What are we supposed, we're supposed to serve the citizens of Nevada. What is happening here? And so you develop your inner monologue develops these stories. And for a lot of people, those stories become the reality. And then conflict arises. And how leaders can address them. Well, I can't say this. You will hear me say this over and over again. I cannot say this enough. Communication. A leader needs to learn how to ask good questions, active inquiry, right? It's something they teach you in coaching school. It's asking open-ended questions, not yes, no questions, asking questions, really seeking to understand what it is the person in front of you needs to tell you, right? Because a lot of times what they need to tell you is not what they're telling you. And really actively listening to what they're telling you. That's most leaders, I don't know, most leaders are, I'm listening, they're not listening. I'm sorry for those of you who are watching this. I just mimed my phone. They're on their phone, right? Or they're writing something down that has nothing to do with what you're talking. There's no interaction. There's no connection. And when that happens, people don't feel heard. People don't feel seen, and that creates further conflict. So then what you have is you've got a perception, you've got a personality, you've got somebody who feels like they're misunderstood because you're not having real communication, and they feel like, well, you don't know what you're doing. because you're always worried about what's on your phone. You're not worried about what's in front of you. And that creates conflict. And that can happen either intra-team, right? From team member to team member. That can happen with a leader. That can happen with other departments, right? The best way to combat it, in my experience, you sit people down and you talk to them and you say, what is going on? Tell me why you're upset. Tell me why this is a problem. And also, let me say, the leader doesn't have to have the answer right then. That's the other misconception, is that the leader's going to have all the answers and they're going to have them immediately. That's unrealistic. So if you say, look, as your leader, I want to talk to you about this. I want to understand what's going on. And then if you'll give me a little bit of time to think about it and think about how I can help or how we can make this better, we can make this better. The other thing I think in terms of workplace conflict that people don't use enough of are mediation. At my last employer, we had a very successful mediation program. We had something like 50 people within the organization. It was a huge organization. We had 50 people within the organization that were trained certified mediators that didn't have a dog in any of the fights, right? In any of the conflicts. And we'd call them in and they'd be a neutral third party to help people work through what was going on. And a lot of times people just want to be heard. They just want to tell you that something is going on and they feel like there needs to be a solution. And then, this is where the mean, bad, ugly HR people happen. Sometimes you can't fix the problem. Sometimes there really is an irreparable issue. And when that happens, yeah, HR needs to get involved and you need to have the conversation with the employee about, okay, here's the policy or here's the standard operating procedure or here's the rule or regulation surrounding this behavior. And we need to have a conversation about how you feel about your future in an organization like ours. Sometimes that has to happen, but it doesn't have to happen in a non-compassionate way. It can happen in a compassionate way.
Yeah, I mean, even the way you've just phrased it is potentially a lot more compassionate than the majority of people would handle that situation, I suspect. But
yeah.
No, I think you're right, and it ties back again to that misunderstanding of the role of a leader, even, doesn't it? And I think particularly those 2 points around perception and communication. We've all been in jobs, most likely, where we've done that.
Mm-hmm.
And you're right. The best way to combat it is not just communication. Listening as well is the most important part of that, but it's the honest and transparent kind of communication.
Right.
It's like not trying to persuade them of the party line or whatever it is, but just having like a frank and full discussion about things.
Right.
Accepting, of course, that there's always going to be that some aspect of information that will be confidential, but
sure.
I think it's just if you don't do that effectively or you don't do it at all, what happens is that the perceptions become the reality.
Yes.
Because people will fill in the gaps by themselves and they will assume far, far worse than the truth, most likely.
Oh, that's exactly right. And sometimes it's hard to get them back. Sometimes
exactly,
you can't make them believe anything other. And the other thing is having the foresight to say, David, we're gonna have this conversation, and I want you to understand something up front. I want to understand what's going on. I want to try to help, but I may not be able to help. I may not be able to affect whatever the outcome is you're looking for. So I want you to know that up front. Being honest and being transparent, and clear. Setting expectations is very important. That's another thing is people have expectations. I know, we try not to have expectations, but we do. Every situation we go into, we have an expectation of some way. And one of my failings as a leader that I worked very hard on was I expected everybody to do their work in the way that I would do it. Right? I wanted the same standard that I thought that I put out from my team. That's really an unfair expectation for a number of reasons. First of all, I never said, I want you all to be just like me, right? And I never had any kind, like, even if I did want that, I never had any kind of demonstration of what that would look like so that there was a mark for them to hit, right? You know what I mean? And a lot of times, one of the things that I found was an issue was, as a leader, having an expectation of an employee, right? We had, at least in civil service, you have performance standards. You have a certain set of standards, and they're tied to the job description typically, and they're tied to whatever so as an engineer, you would have certain job performance standards for being an engineer. But there are those written expectations and those written standards. And then there are the ones that the manager has for you or the leader has for you in their head. The expectations that they're holding you to, or the standards they're holding you to, that you know nothing about. And so you can never hit them. That's something too, is teaching leaders. You can have high expectations of your teams. We want you to have high expectations of your teams, but you gotta tell them what those expectations are. You have to be able to articulate the expectation. And if you can't simply articulate the expectation to the employee, then there's something that you got to work on, leader.
100%. Yeah. And just going back again to where you started, I think it's so important that misconception that the leader always has to have the answer. And I love the idea of saying up front, I might not be able to help you with this, but I want to hear you out.
Yeah.
Because I don't know, I feel like that misconception, most of the time, it comes from the leader themselves. Like, they put themselves under that pressure.
Yes.
I'm leading, I have to have an answer.
Yes.
I don't think the person on the other side of that conversation necessarily expects an immediate answer or solution. And so if you force yourself to offer one, you're actually damaging your credibility with them.
Yes.
As much as anything else.
Yes, and with their coworkers, because you know what's going to happen.
Yeah, because they're going to go and tell everyone.
They're going to go back to the water cooler and tell everybody what just happened.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Absolutely. But yeah, I think it's also about honesty as well, isn't it? And
yes,
you know, I mean, it's unfair on you to put yourself under that kind of expectation, but it's also unfair on them, because whether you realise it or not, you're not being honest if you say something.
Well, and
like, I'll solve that by tomorrow.
Right. Well, and that's, for me as a leader, that was one of my expectations, was that people be honest with me. Mm-hmm. But that's in my life, right? Like, my children forever hear me bang on about, I need you to be honest with me. Do not lie to me. Because if you're lying to me about this, then there might be something down the road that's really serious that I really need to believe you about, that may be a safety issue or something. And I'm not going to believe you because you've spent the last 4 years lying to me. Right. So I have the same sense with the people that I supervise or I lead, but that expectation I can articulate very clearly to them, because I am also, the other failing, I think, in leadership is that we don't teach leaders that they need to let their teams know that it is okay to make mistakes. It is okay to make a mistake. Now, we know that some mistakes are catastrophic. Some mistakes are just easily fixed. But you cannot hold somebody accountable for a catastrophic mistake when it's a typo in a memo. You know what I mean? And there seems to be sort of a one-size-fits-all punitive structure for mistakes that are made. And that's a problem, because you have people who are human and they're doing the best that they can do, and they made a mistake. And you should, one of your questions to me was top 3 team building tips. One of my team building tips is, as a leader, you should create a safe space. You should create a safe space for your team where they know they can come to you and say, boss, I screwed a thing up. Here's how I plan to fix it. Or, boss, I screwed something up and I'm sorry. I'm not sure how to fix it. Can you help me? Right? And where your answer is not going to be you're fired or, wow, okay, you're on suspension now while we figure out what to do with you, or, some yelling, screaming fit. I've had bosses do that. It's okay. What's our solution? How do we fix it? How do we move forward? And then that leader, this is crucial. That leader, if for some reason that mistake comes back on the leader, like say from their leadership, I can't stress this enough. It is imperative that that leader say, we made a mistake. We, as in we the team, I am the team, we made a mistake. We fixed the mistake. Please let us know how you want us to proceed. As opposed to Mandee on my team, she's always screwing up. She did this again. I don't, because what that does is that shows other, like if you're in a leadership meeting, that shows other leaders that you're that guy, right? They're like, oh, right. Okay. Well, Mandee's the scapegoat. So, okay. Well, it's always Mandee, right? And instead of saying, I've got an amazing team, sometimes they make mistakes. We made a mistake. Here's what we did to fix it. Please let me know if you want us to do something differently. It's crucial as a leader for your team to know that they have support and that they're not going to be thrown under the bus needlessly. They're not going to be held to account for some craziness when it's a typo in a memo. You know what I mean?
Absolutely, yeah. And I find it's usually those leaders are the same ones who will take credit for everything when it goes well. It's like, yeah, I did that. Yeah. I led the team that achieved all of that. That was me. Yeah. Pat me on the back.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's so important. And I mean, the honesty point is key, but I think with mistakes, there is no one size fits all when it comes to solving them, firstly. But secondly, like if you punish the little typos as if it's the end of the world, then when something that might be the end of the world comes up, they're not going to tell you.
Exactly.
They'll hide it, they'll quit, and then you're just going to be in so much more trouble.
That is exactly right.
Yeah.
The one thing I said to my team is, look, I don't care how big the mistake is. Please tell me about it, and please let's figure out how to fix it, because I don't want to be blindsided when I am in an upper level leadership meeting. I don't want the governor's office or the city manager's office to come to me and be like, what's with this? And I have no idea about it, because that makes me look like an idiot. And of course, I don't want to look like an idiot, but also that makes us look like we don't know what we're doing as a team, and there's no communication. And whether, it's just as important how the leader's leadership sees them, if you know what I mean.
Yep.
In terms of the everyday operation of a company or of an organization. And I used to say, just don't blindside me. Let me know what's going on. I want to fix things. Tell me what's happening. We will find a fix for it. I will make sure that the people who need to know about it, and we'll move on with our lives.
Yeah, I think the reason so many people get this the wrong way around is because there's this, maybe it's an unspoken assumption or it's a perception, but this idea that if you are relaxed about mistakes, they get more common.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's actually completely back to front. I mean, I've certainly seen it, like the harsher you are in reaction to a mistake, the more frequently they'll happen and the bigger they'll get. Because if you've created that environment of fear, people are so afraid of screwing up that fear, that stress makes them less capable, and the performance drops anyway. And so the mistakes start to stack up.
Absolutely.
Which, is quite counterintuitive for a lot of people, I think, but that's the way it works, unfortunately. So.
That's the way humans work. But if you take the time to build the foundation, like we talked about earlier, of communication, of listening, of active inquiry, of trying to understand, and creating that safe space for your team, you will have a team that, again, they're going to work their butts off for you. They're going to do the best they can do. And they're going to tell you when they screw up because you've made it safe for them to tell you.
Definitely. And that's probably one of the early tests that any new leader is going to face, is the first time someone in your team makes a mistake.
Mm-hmm.
The way you handle that sets the tone for all the future mistakes.
It does.
No pressure though. Like, don't get it wrong. Yeah.
No pressure, leaders out there. It's fine. Yeah.
Yeah. We're not practicing what we preach there, are we? But anyway, yeah. I really want to talk about this micro coaching concept that you're advocating, because I think most people will have heard of coaching and they'll know what that is. So what's the micro bit and how does that work?
Yeah. So it's interesting. In my practice, I have a client who is very high level CFO, and that means that she has a bunch of masters, right? Not just the leadership of the organization, but then there's elected officials she answers to and stuff. So she's got a lot of masters, a lot of pressure, a lot of stuff. And she had a really big meeting with a really big presentation and was just fretting. She was just losing her mind over this. And I kept saying, you know your business. You know they picked you to be this role because you know what you're doing. Trust in your knowledge. Trust that you know what you're doing, right? So we went through the presentation and we worked on presentation skills. We worked on those things. And she got a little bit more confident. And then she called me a couple of days later. Was like, I'm not confident. I said, okay, here's what we're going to do. I'm going to call you 1 hour before that meeting starts. 15 minutes. We're going to talk. She said, okay. So I called her, and there wasn't even a hello, how are you? Nothing. It was, what is your message today? What is the message you are delivering today? What do you want to get across? How are you going to know if your message has gotten across? How are you going to know if that message is really registering with your audience? And what are you going to do to follow up with that group to make sure that they're understanding that this is a dynamic process, it's ongoing, and you will be giving them ongoing information? It was quick, it was dirty, it was like drill sergeant coaching, and I call it micro coaching. It's something that, to me, it's akin to, the psychology superhero pose before you go into a presentation or something. It's very similar. And it helps if you have somebody who can do it with you, like if you have a coach that you work with, but you can also do this yourself. And this is kind of one of the beauties of this, is you can just find a quiet spot for about 10 minutes and drill yourself. What is my message today to this audience? How am I going to know if this audience is picking up what I'm putting down? How am I going to know how am I going to tell them what I'm going to do going forward related to this process? So that you are putting yourself in the mindset of what you need to do, what you need to accomplish, let's say in that meeting or in that presentation. It's very powerful. My client called me that afternoon after the meeting and said, oh my God, Mandee, it went better than I could have ever thought it would. And she had gotten a text message from her longtime mentor, who is a very stoic human, sent her a text message saying, you did an amazing job today. Well done. And she said, that was amazing, right? But it was because you know your stuff, right? If you're in that position, you know your stuff. You have to be confident that you can present it. And you have to be cognizant of your audience. How am I going to get this across to this particular audience? What are the words I need to use for this particular audience? And how am I going to know if they're getting it, right? It's strangely very, very effective. I guess not strangely, but it's really cool. It's really cool to watch.
I really like the idea of self-coaching there as well. I mean, I also like the idea of that third party perspective that a coach or a mentor brings, but sometimes you don't have the time.
Yeah, right.
to go
Exactly.
through that whole
Sometimes you don't have
conversation, do you? Yeah.
right.
It's yeah, I mean that's a great demonstration as well, the story of how it works. So yeah, thank you for sharing that. And yeah, I mean coaching feels like it's something that all leaders should be able to do anyway.
I am so glad you said that. One of the things, so let me step back a little bit.
Mhm.
Coaching is, I realized before I trained to become a licensed coach, right? A certified coach. I realized because I had sought my own coach as an executive, because I also have ADD, and being an executive with ADD brings its own struggles. I realized though through my own process that this is something that I've been doing my whole career, right? As an HR professional, I spent a lot of time coaching people on, coaching people on performance, coaching people on opportunities that they could take advantage of, coaching people on, job readiness, those kinds of things. And it's something that comes sort of innately to a lot of people, but some people need to learn it. But it's a skill, that active inquiry and active listening piece. It's a skill that can be learned and can be taught, and it's not difficult. It's just something that you kind of need to practice to get good at and to understand how it works. And I absolutely think it should be part of every leadership training course. It should be, something that here's how you can make yourself a coach to your teams, right? And that goes along with that safe space as well. The other thing that I want to say surrounding this is I think, and this goes back to what I first said, or what I said in the beginning, this perception of who a leader is or what a leader is or how they should look or how they should behave, to me, it's a load of manure. And I think, I'm sorry, I think you probably have a family audience. I have more colorful words, but we'll put it that way.
Don't worry, we've definitely had
Um,
worse than manure. Yeah.
all right. And the reason I say that is because humans are so different from each other. It's what makes this world an amazing place. Different cultures, different ideas, different personalities, different, belief systems, who we are as people. Trying to stick a human into this suit and tie stoic mold is folly. And I think this is why leadership fails in a lot of ways for its teams. Because number one, I believe we should teach leadership at every level of the organization. I think that along with those mandatory classes that you have when you first get hired in your new employee orientation, like drug and alcohol awareness and sexual harassment prevention, and, in the United States, we have policies and procedures, and then we have the Family Medical Leave Act and the Americans with Disabilities Act and familiarity stuff. I think you should get a leadership training class because people can lead at all levels of the organization. And some people want to lead, but they are never given the professional opportunity because maybe they don't look or sound the way that everybody else does. So leadership is not the clothes you wear. Leadership is not what race you are or what your biological affinity is, to use my anthropological term. Leadership is not what school you went to, what degree you hold. Leadership is about knowing and understanding how to mobilize teams to do what they need to do. And you could have a custodian should be given leadership training because maybe there's going to come a situation where that'll kick in for them. Maybe they have to lead a team. Your secretary should have leadership training. Perhaps she needs to lead a project. And, but also we need to give our employees the same, the same words. Because I don't know about you, but I've had leaders go to conferences and come back and be like, oh, we're going to try this new thing. I learned this new thing at this conference and we're going to try this new thing. And here are all the new buzzwords. And everybody's sitting around going, what did he say? What is that English? What did he say? Right? because you're not, no, you don't understand the same thing. So if you give everybody the same playbook, right, people are going to understand more why you're doing what you're doing. They're going to understand, okay, we're going to have to pivot, and here's how we do this. And so in my world, and what I train and what I'm developing right now is, for lack of a better term, because I understand this is not inclusive, but it's my working title, is everyman leadership. I want to make leadership training courses that are for everybody, and they're accessible, and they are not cost prohibitive. That's another problem we have with leadership, is typically the people who have access to leadership training have already been handpicked or identified. And so the money goes to them. It doesn't go to other people within organizations. And so if somebody wants to take leadership training and they have to pay for it out of pocket, I want to make it something that's affordable for them. Because I was one of those people who worked in an organization, training dollars were scarce. And so having something that's accessible and affordable and can give you some leadership skills, and then maybe you want to move on with that. Maybe you don't, because not everybody's a leader, right? Some of us are born charismatic leaders. Some of us are born going, please, God, don't pick me to lead anything. So other people are like, oh, okay, well, I can do it if I have to. Some folks are really happy just coming to work every day, doing the job, and going home. It takes all kinds to form a team. But if we give them all the skills or the knowledge of the skills, to me, that makes better team members, and it makes better leaders.
I agree. I think everyone should have access to it. I'm with you on everything you said about availability and affordability as well. I mean, a very similar approach that I take in my business as well. It is a difficult one. I mean, it would, no question, create better leaders at later stages of their career if they're given that training before they get to that level. Because there's so many that we've encountered, I'm sure we both have, where they've already got to the lofty heights and never even seen, heard, or thought about what leadership is and how to do it. And even once they get to those lofty heights, in so many organizations, even then, they're still not given training until or unless they really badly stuff something up from a leadership perspective, or they offend someone, or they have some other, well, again, with your HR background, you know more about that than the rest of us, no doubt. Yes. And then it's like, here's some remedial training. But even then, it'll be, we want you to go and do this strategic leadership course because you have to cater to the ego, Daniel. They won't agree to do it. And
Oh, and it happens more than you think. I mean, it's,
I don't know.
Especially civil service, there's this, everybody has a joke about civil servants, but I have seen where literally the last old white man standing is the guy who becomes the leader of the group. And, maybe he's been an electrician his whole life, and suddenly he's the director of public works, has had no leadership training, has had no supervisory, he doesn't know. And suddenly he's in charge of all of his friends. Right. And then, and the organization doesn't step up and say, hey, let me assign you a coach, or, hey, let me assign you an HR professional that can help you navigate these things, or, hey, let me put you through this training. It doesn't work that way. We just throw people in the deep end and hope that, no disaster happens. And I think it's really a backwards way, especially when we're talking about millions and millions and millions and millions of dollars in taxpayer money, in terms of government, in constituency services. I mean, it's ludicrous that we take leadership so lightly, in my opinion.
It really is. But I think, going back to your other point as well, it makes people better employees. Like if you've done the leadership training, if you've learned how to coach and how to ask those kinds of questions as well, you're going to have better communications with colleagues at the same level.
Absolutely.
I think it's actually, when we were talking about conflict earlier, I think it's actually one of the best ways to defuse a conflict as well, is if you switch out of the fixed position, he said, she said, and then come at it more from a curiosity, asking questions, try to understand the other person's point of view. And that serves you because you're changing your mindset. You're not looking at it as your side and their side. You're thinking about, how do I understand their perspective? I'll ask questions to get to that. it also changes the other side, in inverted commas, because suddenly they're not trying to counter what you're saying. They're just trying to answer questions and communicate their point of view instead.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And that is exactly why mediation works so well, right? Because that onus is on a third party, but having the ability to ask questions and really listen to the answers and really try to understand it. And that's the other thing is people spend, I don't know about you in conversations you have, but people are often just waiting for their turn to talk. They're not listening to the answer that's being given. And so if somebody is engaging in active listening, a lot of times they'll take a pause or they'll take a beat after somebody said something. And then because we're so used to this rapid fire thing, the person who said the thing is like, were you listening to me? You weren't listening to me, right? And so we really need to also teach the art of conversation, the art of sometimes people need a beat to think, to like gather how they think or how they feel or what they want to say to you. It's not always rapid fire, and it doesn't mean that they're not listening to you. In fact, it means they are listening to you and they're trying to be more engaged and more thoughtful in their response. We need to teach that too.
Just going to take a pause there before I. No, you're right. I think I prefer it if people take the time to think. Like, and I agree with you. I've had people say that to me as well. I was like, "Were you listening?" It's like, yeah, I'm just collecting my thoughts. I don't want to have the knee jerk or off the cuff or the prepared response. I want to actually genuinely answer what you've said.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. So I actually take that as a compliment when people don't have an immediate answer the second I stop talking. In all of that time, particularly from the civil service angle, I would love to know what your story is of the best experience you had of being led.
Do you know, I worked at the city of Las Vegas for 15 years in Las Vegas, Nevada. And it was a city manager run structure with a city council. And I was in human resources, and I was a lower level human resources professional. And we got a new city manager. And she had been the assistant city manager for years. She had grown up in government. And she was already very charismatic and dynamic, as a person. But when she became city manager, she looked around and said, our organizational culture sucks. We have got to do something about this. And she did some research and hit on Patrick Lencioni's 5 dysfunctions of a team, and started sort of studying the Lencioni model, and then decided that that's sort of the way she wanted to go to affect culture change, and then began requiring her direct reports, so these were department directors, to read the Lencioni information. And then they did a retreat with the author and, to learn these things. And she required of her subordinates either buy in or get out. This was an approach that what I had never seen in my career as a civil servant, because there's the old joke, it takes an act of Congress to get fired if you're a civil servant. It is rather cumbersome, but these were executives, right? They were appointed. They had no job security necessarily. But she said, you're either on this bus or you're off the bus. And she spent about a year gaining support from her leadership staff and the executive team. And then she rolled it out organization wide. And during the course of this, she created a mnemonic, and every employee had an ID badge card that we put with our ID badges, with the mnemonic on it, with our mission, with our vision, with the values were the mnemonic of the organization with this culture change. And I can remember she had a town hall meeting for employees, and I said, you're trying to affect culture change within this organization. She said, absolutely. I said, and how long do you think it's going to take? And she said, well, most culture change initiative takes about 10 years. And I'm thinking, 10 years? Are you, what? Right? And she said, but I'm hoping it'll take less. And I will tell you that she was able to change the culture from top to bottom in 3 years' time. Every employee got on board with this new vision and mission and values. And then when we did new employee orientation, this was my favorite part. When we did I taught new employee orientation at the time. And she would come down and she would do an address to new employees. Now, she was the city manager. She was the head of the organization. She would come down and we would give them their little cards for their badges. And we would talk about the mission and the vision and the values. And she would talk about the importance of the culture at the city of Las Vegas as an employer. And she would say, if this doesn't resonate with you, if these values are not values you can support and embody, I want you not to work for the city of Las Vegas. You can leave now. I had never seen a leader do that before. And I was so, it was so funny. I had this mixture of pride and fear, right? But I was like, yes, finally, somebody who's saying, this is who we are. If you don't want to be part of who we are, that's fine, but you need to find another place to be. And that experience shaped the kind of leader that I became, because I then went on to positions of leadership and actively tried to change culture in those positions. And most people would tell me I was crazy. Why are you doing this? You can't change culture in government. Yes, you can. I was a part of it. I've seen it happen. I was a part of it. I know it can happen. The problem is, I was an HR kid. I was either the director of HR or some lowly HR person, and I'm pushing from the inside. And what that leader had done was spent a lot of time getting buy-in from her executive team and working out. And one person within an organization can't, you can start and you can make progress, but it's not going to work organization wide. And that's where I went wrong. But I know it can be done. I watched it happen and it was phenomenal. And to this day, that culture still exists at the city of Las Vegas. It was transformational and it was amazing.
Hard to find a better reference on that, is the fact that it's still there. Yeah, I mean, love The Five Dysfunctions as well. That's a great book.
Yeah, Lencioni's work is amazing. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I guess I'm slightly hesitant about the my way or the highway approach, but I suppose when you're talking about the culture rather than any individual decision, perhaps that is okay. I don't know.
And probably I should tell you what the guiding principles were. So the values, I guess the values were, the mnemonic was action. So it was accountability, creativity, teamwork, integrity, ownership now. So it is literally, let's see, it's almost 10 years later and I still remember the mnemonic. Like, it was that powerful. And I think that, having things like accountability and integrity and ownership in your values and creativity, that's the other thing, man. Boy, giving people the time and the space to be creative about their work, even in a civil service situation, even when you think it's paper pushing, can create so much amazing stuff. I mean, it's really cool. But anyway, sorry. Yes, you're right. The my way or the highway is not necessarily the way to go, but what was pivotal, I think, was that she she was adamant, this is our culture and this is what we embody. And she would quiz people. I mean, she would stop people and be like, what's action? We would do awards for people that embodied accountability or embodied creativity or embodied teamwork. I mean, it really was sort of all encompassing in a way. And in that way, people had the opportunity to buy in. It was pretty great.
Yeah, fair enough. And yeah, I mean, it's clear from the way you speak about it as well. So
Yeah.
Definitely left an impression, didn't it?
It was pretty pivotal, actually.
Yeah. Interesting. I'm sure there must be quite a lot written about that as a case study as well. So I'm going to go away and research that afterwards. Okay, so 2 more questions, and then I'll let you get back to the rest of your day because you've been very generous with your time today. So the first of those 2 is, if you had the chance to start your career over again, is there anything you would do differently?
Do you know what's funny is I've been thinking about this particular question since you sent it to me. And the truth is, I don't know. I mean, certainly there are some mistakes that I've made that I wish I hadn't. But those mistakes also taught me lessons that I needed to learn as both a team member and as a leader. And all of the experiences that I've had over the last 24 years have made me who I am, both as a leader, as an HR professional, and now as a coach and a consultant. And it has really shaped, what I believe leadership is and how I want to move forward in this space and teach other leaders. So I don't know that I would do anything differently, actually.
It's quite an honest answer. Thank you. I think if most people, the majority of people, I mean, ignoring the people who ended up in prison because of a really bad business decision, etc., I think the majority are going to answer pretty much the way you have, I suspect.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, there's individual things that all of us wish we hadn't done. But in the grand scheme of things, if you're happy with where you are, it's got to be no, hasn't it?
Yeah. I've been exceedingly fortunate in my career. I've worked with some amazing people doing amazing things. And I have a sense of service as a result of being a civil servant. And I think it's just, it makes me who I am, and it makes me want to sort of deliver my message to as many people as I can connect with about, you may not think that you're leadership material, but I'm here to tell you that you probably are. And, but on the flip side of that, one thing I think we need to acknowledge is that leadership is hard. It's a difficult role to be in. And there are going to be ups and there are going to be downs. But for the most part, the beauty of leadership is the team and what you do and what you accomplish, the service you provide, or the widgets you make. And that's really sort of where it's at. Those humans that help accomplish that goal is where it's at.
I don't think there's anything you've said today that I haven't agreed with, but that one, so spot on. Yes, it is a difficult role. It is a huge responsibility. Even if you're only leading one person, you still have such an impact on their career, their fate, their day-to-day journey as well. So it is a massive responsibility not to be taken lightly, but it's also a privilege. It's one of the best jobs you can get. I mean, Anyway.
It is absolutely
like any job, it'll have its ups and downs, but on average, it's an amazing kind of role to have. No question about that. Lovely. Well, last question, my favorite question as well, in case you hadn't guessed. So I call this Leadership Heroes.
Leadership Heroes.
So if you had to pick one person They could be anyone you like you don't have to have met them. They could be alive or dead, past or present, real or even fictitious, if you fancy that. Who, in your opinion, would perfectly embody leadership? Who would that person be and why?
Oh boy. Well, okay. So, my first answer would be the leader I told you about, City of Las Vegas, that did the culture change. To me, she's a complete rock star in terms of leadership. I think if I were to talk about fictional heroes in terms of leadership, I would go, and this is going to make people both laugh and cry, I think. The United States had a show, started, I think, in 1995, 94, called The West Wing. And Martin Sheen played President Jed Bartlett. And I loved his leadership because it was so flawed. It was so human. And he was so human in this massive role of responsibility and human lives and the people around him. And he had to learn over the course of his presidency that, it wasn't about him and it wasn't about the power. And, I really appreciate the humility that came with realizing that he is human and that just because you're the president of the United States doesn't mean you can do anything you want to do whenever you want to do it.
Doesn't it?
Well, I mean, so that's another podcast.
No comment, I think, probably. Yeah.
I have lots of comments, but you don't want to hear them. And then in terms of a national, President Barack Obama, to me, the approach of change and we can change, and literally the audacity of hope, the audacity of having hope that we can change and leading in that way and engaging people who hadn't previously been engaged in the conversation, having seats at the table, just is inspirational, just generally and specifically to me, because in my opinion, one of the things about leadership is if you can't see it, you can't be it. So if there's not a leader in the world that looks like you may not believe you can be a leader like that. And that's the first time in American history, in my opinion, that we've had somebody who really embodied integrity and authenticity in that kind of an office that could show people what you can do. I think it's pretty inspiring.
Yeah, interesting. I think authenticity is probably the key word that links potentially all three of those together, but definitely the last two. Big fan of The West Wing as well. I have the box set. It's
excellent. I do too.
Yeah, I mean, I think the one that, as you were talking about, why you would choose him. What stuck in my mind was that episode when I think it was during his campaign for re-election, and where they were going through all of these machinations of like the politicalese kind of side of the whole operation. Where you can't be this way, you can't say that, you don't do this in public. Right. All of this. Then by the end of the episode, they changed that to, do you know what? Just be yourself. Let Bartlett be Bartlett, I think was the quote. Let Bartlett
be Bartlett. Absolutely.
And then funnily enough, he won. So yeah, great lesson there about authenticity, isn't there?
Yeah. I mean, that's really, I think that's what draws people together is if you, and in leadership generally, if you are your authentic self, not what you think the construct is, people will gravitate to you. They will follow where you lead. And it's powerful. Authenticity is powerful.
Yeah, definitely. When done right and not to excess, I would caveat that with. But
yes. Yeah,
and I think that the counter to that is people will see through it much more easily than you think if you're not.
Absolutely.
Unless you're like a really well-practiced sociopath or something. But,
even still, I think that there are a lot of people right now in the United States going, wow, we let these people have microphones. okay.
Yeah. God, I nearly made it through an episode without talking about politics. I was almost proud of myself.
I'm so sorry.
That's okay.
You didn't give me this is a no politics zone.
It's not a no politics show. It's just it's supposed to be leadership. But it's difficult to separate the two, though, isn't it? Because they're the most public, most well-known examples of leaders, aren't they? So yeah.
Well, and they're the ones. I mean, let's be honest. They're the ones who perpetuate that mythos of what leadership should look like. And that when you have people who are other in those spaces, they tend to be marginalized, and that's sort of where I'm like, why? I mean, have you traveled the United States? There are a lot of weird folks out there, right? Like there are folks out there who have weird beliefs. There are folks that are amazing, authentic, salt of the earth people who, live off the grid and are hippies and whatever, but that doesn't mean they can't be leaders. That doesn't mean they can't, accomplish something. It's just this idea of what we have to be in order to succeed or to lead is so antithetical to what I believe and who I am, that I think it's time that we stop pretending and start putting real people in positions of leadership who are authentic and who are going to move our this big human mess forward rather than backward.
Yeah, I don't want to get on my soapbox, but so I see this very much as a parallel to the conversation about why there's so many bad managers when you talk about political leadership. But I think where they differ is the political system, I mean, certainly in this country, perhaps in yours as well, I don't know, you tell me. I think the system's got to the point now where nobody who is like that kind of authentic, good, ethical, doing it for the right reasons and all of the above type of leader wants to do it.
Yes, there's that. And if they do want to do it, there's a significant barrier to entry. And that is, one needs money to run a political campaign and to be elected to office. And it's a popularity contest, and it's how much money's in your bank account contest. And so somebody like me, while I would not consider running for office, somebody like me who might want to, I would spend all of my time trying to fundraise rather than having real conversations with constituents about what they truly want me to take to Washington, D.C., or, those kinds of things. So there's a barrier to entry in terms of financial status that only few people have been able to overcome. AOC comes to mind. She's one of those people that was able to mobilize, but even in local government, the same is true. There's a lot of name recognition, and there's a lot of, financial barriers that come with being elected to office. And so unfortunately, I think we're sort of slaves to our own capitalism in terms of that. And I think that's part of the problem. You have people who really, once they get elected to office, conveniently forget about what it's like to be everyman, trying to make your mortgage, trying to put your kids through school, trying to raise decent human beings in your kids, trying to pay your bills. And that's really unfortunate. And I have a sense that that's sort of the way it is in Britain as well, in terms of your MPs and, your House of Lords and House of Commons. And that's unfortunate because you're not getting truly representative people of the constituents.
Yeah, I mean, without going into the politics of it too much, but I think it is more or less the same. Potentially, it's marginally worse because obviously one of our houses is unelected, or both of yours are at least. We don't directly elect our national leadership either. It's just by default the winning leader of the winning party. I don't know. It's a tough one. Yeah, and I mean, the other part of it, the financial aspects that nobody considers, is you basically have to stop working for like a year or two while you're campaigning profits.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you've got to have a decent amount in the bank before you start to have the confidence you can pay the mortgage or whatever.
It really is a huge barrier to entry for, citizen politicians.
Yeah.
And that's really unfortunate, especially, I mean, if you go back and you read, historical government documents about the United States and why we, wanted to be independent and why we set the country up like it is. And we wanted citizen leadership. We wanted to be, by the people and of the people. And we have gotten so far away from that because of special interest and those things. And I suppose that's true in every government everywhere. But when it's difficult. It's difficult to be an American citizen and to really enjoy the fruits of being an American citizen, but at the same time know that the privileges and freedoms that I enjoy are only as safe as who's sitting in the Oval Office right now. And that is a really scary prospect for a lot of people. Yeah,
isn't it? We're going to have to talk more about politics offline, I think. Otherwise, we're going to have a whole episode on it. Yeah, sorry about that.
No worries.
No, it is interesting. I mean, my bachelor's degree was in politics, so that's probably the reason why I always go off on tangents about it. And I do find it very interesting academically, but you put too much thought into it, it gets really depressing really quickly.
Oh, yeah. No, I can't watch the news habitually because it bums me out.
Yeah. Especially in an election year as well. Yeah.
Oh, my goodness, yes.
Well, Mandee, it's been lovely meeting and talking with you today. I will ask you one more small little question, which is, if any of the listeners want to learn more about you, learn about your business, perhaps get in touch, where can they go?
Absolutely. You can find me on Twitter at Blue Note Res, R-E-S. You can find me on LinkedIn, Blue Note Resources, or Mandee Bowsmith. And you can find me on my website, bluenoteresources.com.
Lovely. And I will be sure to put those links in the episode description as well, so everyone can find them easily. Well, that's it. That's more than we've got time for, really. We've overrun. So it must have been a great conversation. Have a great rest of your day, and thanks very much again.
Thank you.
Thank you again, Mandee, for a great chat today. I enjoyed myself, and I'm sure the listeners or viewers did too. Speaking of which, listener or viewer, whichever you are, if you would like to know more about Mandee's work, then do pay a visit to those links that I've put in the show notes or the description below. Do that now. Don't miss out. Loads of stuff to learn. Also, don't forget, come and join us at Integrity Leaders. If imposter syndrome, leadership knowledge, confidence, or workplace interactions are something you are struggling with as a manager or a founder, then you can access learning, resources, even some one-to-one support from me at www.leadernotaboss.com, and just click on that green button and sign up to join the Integrity Leaders online community. And I've built this specifically for new leaders, first-time founders, or learner managers, people just like you. And as a podcast listener, you can use the exclusive promotional code of HALF-OFF24. So that's half off, all caps, all one word, and the digits 2 and 4. That will give you a 50% discount on your monthly membership for as long as you remain a part of the community. So I'm looking forward to welcoming you aboard. That's all from me today. Do tune in again next week when I'll be chatting leadership in the Marvel Cinematic Universe and more with my guest, Sai Islam. So if you're a fan of the films, the comics, or just an all-round nerd like me, it's not an episode you want to be missing. I'll see you then. Thanks again for listening/watching today. And until next week, be a leader. not a boss.